A man sat down, savoring his meal. Fried thunder dragon meat, just as delicious as he expected. He felt satisfied, knowing he'd found a great gift for the villagers. Meanwhile, in the forest, strange objects were lined up in a circle, sticking out of the ground. It turned out to be a teleportation spot for a horse-drawn carriage. The scene shifts to a carriage traveling to Yolm, a vibrant village in the Western Ural Kingdom. It's June 1013 according to the holy calendar, and the villagers are busy and cheerful. The village's old gatekeeper spotted the carriage and recognized Kakyu, our main character. They exchanged jokes, and when Kakyu tried to pay the entrance fee, the old man refused, saying Kakyu was already part of the village. Still, Kakyu insisted. Rules are like promises to him, and he always keeps his promises. Later, Kakyu prepared a meal for the villagers, who enjoyed it thoroughly, agreeing that his cooking was simply delicious. That night, Kakyu treated everyone to a feast, encouraging them to eat as much as they wanted. When a man questioned if he was serious about serving such high-quality meat and wondered where it came from, Kakyu claimed it was thunder dragon meat, which made everyone laugh at what they took as a tall tale. Alma, a little girl, defended Kakyu, insisting he never lies. Arnau, Alma's father, eyed Kakyu with suspicion, seeing him as a swindler. Dsui intervened, noting that Kakyu's ability to supply such premium meat in large quantities made him a valuable prospect. An elderly man even jokingly offered Kakyu his granddaughter, leaving Kakyu flustered. The room was filled with warmth and laughter, though Kakyu remained quietly contemplative from the sidelines. After the party, Arnau invited Kakyu to stay the night, which he happily accepted. Meanwhile, Dsui winced in discomfort, her baby kicking energetically thanks to the meat he brought. Alma was thrilled with the baby due in about a month. Kakyu promised to return the next month after his trip, which pleased everyone, especially Dsui, who was sure her baby would be happy. Later, Kakyu collapsed onto his bed, exhausted but content. He marveled at the normalcy of his life now, a far cry from the hardships of his past. A long time ago, he died in Japan and was thrown straight into hell for his wrongdoings. Reincarnated as a demon, life was hellish, literally. He faced countless near-death situations with both monstrous creatures and powerful demons. The constant battles between Satan and Zeus didn't help, making every day a fight for survival. Despite the chaos, he clung to life for 2 grueling years, fighting tooth and nail. Eventually, he gained enough wisdom and power to hold his own. Then, in a massive clash between Zeus and Satan, Kakyu found himself caught in the middle. With their epic showdown causing a huge explosion, he thought he was done for. But when he woke up, he was in a completely different world from Earth. It took him some time to get his bearings, but he soon figured things out. Disguising himself as a human and pretending to have amnesia, he learned the language and culture of Yoln village, which he discovered 3 years ago. Now, as a traveling merchant, his new life feels like a dream come true. He often chuckles at his own luck, amazed by how unreal it feels to be living this second chance. After surviving hell, he now enjoys good food, peaceful sleep, and a sense of safety. Plus, the strength he gained in hell makes him a force to be reckoned with in this new world. Kakyu laughed out loud, cursing Satan under his breath, as Alma suddenly appeared in his room looking confused. She had been sent by her mother to bring him water, and with a shy smile, she also handed him a pair of leather gloves. Alma had heard that traveling merchants often get rope burns from handling horse reins, so she made the gloves as a gift. They fit perfectly on Kakyu's hands, and he praised her skill. Alma, her fingers still rough from sewing, was thrilled to hear him say he'd treasure them. Full of excitement, she blurted out that the gloves were for her future husband, then immediately turned red and hurried out of the room. Kakyu was amused, but knew the truth. His demon skin was too tough to get rope burns, and marrying her wasn't possible. Watching Arnau's happy family made him pause. Demons don't age, and he couldn't bear the thought of outliving a human family. The next morning, Arnau invited Kakyu to go fishing after breakfast. As they cast their lines into the calm river, Arnau jokingly brought up Alma's courage in giving Kakyu the gloves, adding that he was jealous. Shouting, He told Kakyu that he wouldn't let him have his daughter, which Kakyu fully understood. He wasn't lolicon anyway. They spent the day fishing and teasing each other, enjoying the peaceful moment. Kakyu couldn't figure out what Alma saw in him. Ardno explained that it was probably because Kakyu had saved her life. Alma had been born weak, and doctors didn't expect her to live past 10, but about a year and a half ago, when Kakyu came back from one of his trips, she started eating the meat and spices he brought, and her health improved dramatically. Ardno admitted that when Kakyu first arrived with no background and no ability to speak their language, he didn't know what to do with him. But now, Ardno, and the whole village, was grateful to him. In his past life, Kakyu had never experienced anything like this. Hearing the villagers thank him was a relief. As they fished, Ardno reeled in his line and brought up the main topic. A draft notice had come from the central government, and Ardno had decided to join the army. Kakyu asked why so suddenly, but it turned out Ardno was a reserve soldier. Recently, demon activity had spiked in the Ural Kingdom. Kakyu, a traveling merchant, had missed this news because he always used teleportation to get around. Ardno mentioned that if something ever happened to him, he wanted Kakyu to take care of Alma and Ars. Ars was the name of the baby in Jui's womb, and while it wasn't confirmed, Ardno was convinced it'd be a boy. His request was just a precaution, as his own father had been devoured by demons. Kakyu hesitated, uncertain about taking on such responsibility, but Ardno had faith in him. Still, Kakyu didn't make any promises. A while later, Kakyu's horse-drawn cart was ready at the village border, set to continue his journey. He told Alma he'd return at the end of next month to meet her baby brother. Before leaving, Kakyu called her over and placed a dragon-scale necklace around her neck as thanks for the gloves. Alma's face lit up with joy at the gift, and with that, they parted ways. Kakyu traveled through several towns, enjoying time at the local pubs, doing his merchant work, and occasionally exploring ruins. By July, he arrived in Wyverna, the royal capital of the Gizaria Dragon Kingdom. Over the past month, he'd done so well in his trade that he got promoted to an intermediate level merchant, which meant he could now strike deals with nobles. Afterward, he visited a clothing shop to buy some black garments. The old woman shopkeeper was impressed by his swift promotion, and he couldn't wait to brag about it back in the village. However, she also shared some troubling news. The Holy Knights were on an expedition in Ural, Kakyu's home region. Blessed by the goddess, these knights could detect demons and, once every few years, were permitted to go on a special mission to wipe out any hidden demons in nearby countries. It would have been fine if that were the whole story, but rumors suggested something darker. The knights were accused of exploiting common people, falsely accusing villagers of being demons and stealing from them. Kakyu didn't stick around to hear more. The moment she warned him to be careful, he was gone. With Mana Purge, he erased every trace of himself from the city. Something felt off, he knew it. So, he used teleportation magic without a second thought. In no time, his carriage was speeding through the forest. As he dashed out of the thick trees, a distant plume of smoke caught his eye. His heart raced, his hands shook. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. It's nothing, he thought. Maybe someone was cooking or burning grass in the fields. But the dread wouldn't leave him. When he reached the village, everything seemed normal. Ardno and Alma greeted him, smiling as usual. But it was all an illusion. In reality, the village was ablaze. Everywhere he looked, houses were engulfed in flames, and villagers lay lifeless, consumed by fire. His heart sank when he saw the ones he cared about most. The old gatekeeper, Ardno, Alma, and Jui, all lying dead at his feet. Rain began to pour, making the scene even more heart-wrenching. Kakyu gently lifted Alma's lifeless body, his anger and sorrow clouding his mind. He activated his demon abilities, Devil's Eye and Soul Viewer, to replay the tragic events that had just unfolded. The villagers had gathered to tell the Holy Knights they knew nothing of any demons. But the knights insisted they sensed an evil presence and discovered dragon meat, a substance only a demon could possess. The villagers were given a chance to clear their names by revealing who brought the meat. But Ardno stayed silent, protecting someone dear to him. In the end, the villagers raised their weapons, choosing to defend Kakyu, sealing their fate. Tears streamed down Kakyu's face. It had happened again. Once more, he failed to save anyone. He couldn't shake the feeling that this world was cruel, unfair, and utterly senseless. Kakyu's anger boiled over. There was no holding back now. Using his devil's eye and soul searcher, he locked onto the fleeing holy knights, following the tracks their horses left behind. He closed in, the path leading him through mountains, until finally he found them. Without hesitation, a spark of light ignited in his hand. He raised it to the sky, and a brilliant meteor streaked across the night, lighting up the land for miles. It hurtled toward the holy knights, the ones who had ripped his family away from him once again. They didn't stand a chance. As the ground shook beneath the meteor's impact, Kakyu's mind raced. 2 years. He had lost so much in that time. Hell had been nothing but war and death. He had been dominated, starved, and forced to fight for survival. He had betrayed, plundered, killed. He had consumed the flesh and souls of others until he was more demon than human. When he first arrived in the village, his plan had been simple. Use the people for information, and if they didn't cooperate, kill them all. But something changed. He found warmth, care, and trust, and with it, a piece of his humanity began to return. For the first time in years, he laughed without bitterness. He tasted food that wasn't stolen. The hands that reached out to him were warm, offering something he hadn't felt in so long, a sense of belonging. But now, that was all gone. The pain of losing it again twisted inside him, and he cursed Satan for taking away even the smallest glimmer of peace he had found. If this was what life had become, endless loss, he no longer cared. He didn't need anything anymore. If everything he gained was destined to be ripped away, then he might as well destroy it all. The demon inside him stirred, whispering in the back of his mind, reminding him of what he truly was. As Kakyu began transforming into his true demon form, he found himself in the depths of his subconscious, face to face with Alma. She tried to stop him, urging him to get a grip, but he knew it was too late. This was his true nature, and there was no fighting it. He apologized, admitting that he had lost everything. To him, they were the only family he had ever known. Alma embraced him warmly, and that simple gesture brought a wave of calm over him. Suddenly, a sound broke through, crying. Slowly, Kakyu snapped out of his demon form, drawn by the cries of a baby. He carefully opened a small box, revealing a tiny, tearful child. Around the baby's neck was a dragon-scale necklace, the one Kakyu had given to Alma. In that instant, memories of Arno flooded his mind, their conversations, their bond. The child was supposed to be born for this month, and here he was, safe and alive. Overcome with emotion, Kakyu cradled the baby boy in his arms, tears streaming down his face. This was Ars, the child Arno had entrusted to him. The one person Arno believed could care for his son. Kakyu had once hesitated to make any promises, but now, as he held Ars close, he swore an unbreakable oath. He would raise this child as his son, to be the happiest person in the world, even if it meant staking his very soul. Kakyu regretted not making that promise to Arno sooner, but now he was determined. Ars would live a life full of happiness, because Kakyu's vow was absolute. Meanwhile, in the realm of Earth's hell, Satan and Zeus were locked in a game of chess, mocking Kakyu for using his soul to make a contract. Despite the taunts, both deities secretly had high hopes for him. Kakyu, a lesser demon, had a power that rivaled the highest-ranking demons. Zeus even warned Satan that if this lesser demon ended up causing trouble in someone else's world, he would burn hell to the ground. But between their banter, the two supreme deities agreed on one chilling thing. The child Kakyu had taken in, Ars, was destined to kill him someday. In the demon realm, inside the Grand Demon Emperor's palace, 3 figures sat on their thrones, reviewing recent intel. A figure with the clown mask confidently reported that his subordinate witnessed a massive explosion caused by a powerful caster, possibly as strong as the Emperor himself, 𝚁𝚎𝚒 Lucifer. The clown added that Insect Lord's direct subordinate had already set up an investigation at the site. Overwhelmed by 𝚁𴑎𝚒, one of his 4 strongest generals, Emperor Zell ordered all subordinates of the demon lords to stay out of it. Hades chimed in, sensing his father's lack of enthusiasm, and volunteered to investigate. However, a female figure quickly warned him to watch his words. Impressed by the caster's ability to remain undetected even from the heaven realm, Zell wasn't sure who this person was, but assumed they weren't an enemy since they attacked the knights. For now, he decided to wait patiently, confident they would eventually fall into his hands. In the human realm, within the 𝚁𝚒 church nation, a joyful crowd gathered to welcome an important figure. Despite their fear after hearing the news from Ural, the princess blessed them with the goddess's protection, renewing their hope. They believed the saint would find the hero foretold in legend. Sword Saint Zied Kruger remarked to the 58th Pope, Arleus de Calamira, that the people were celebrating the birth of his successor. Arleus felt the heavy burden on his shoulders lighten, knowing his daughter was bringing hope as the saint. Although the aristocrats seemed displeased, there was no time for political conflict. The birth of a saint signaled imminent danger to the human realm. The woman beside the Pope, likely his wife, reassured him that their child would guide the hero. Amid the festivities, they prayed for the goddess's continued blessing. So, here's how the isekai world map works. There are 3 layers, all connected by the world tree. At the top, you've got the heaven realm, home to gods, angels, and the goddess of creation. In the middle is the human realm, with 4 continents, north, south, east, and west, inhabited by humans and demi-humans. And at the bottom lies the demon realm, where powerful demons and beasts live, ruled by the demon emperor. Right now, we're in the human realm, where Kakyu is running a farm. It's been a month and a half since he adopted Ars, and milking the goats he teleported from Yoln village has become part of his morning routine. Ars, now full of energy, is crawling around like crazy, keeping Kakyu on his toes. On top of that, Kakyu's still getting the hang of dealing with baby tantrums. Being a papa for a month and a half has made him a pro at making milk. He heats water in a pan and cools it down to human body temperature using magic. But today, the milk's a bust. Ars' face says it all. Yuck. Depending on the day, goat milk can taste different, so sometimes this happens. Kakyu tries to fix it with nut jam and sugar cubes, but nope. Ars takes 1 sip, then spits it right out. This kind of stuff really gets him down, but he doesn't give up. He tries to change out of his milk-stained clothes, but even that turns out to be a struggle. Raising a kid? Way harder than he thought. It's not like he underestimated it though. He's fought in hell for 2,000 years and mastered thousands of spells. He figured he could handle parenting like a pro, but reality hit him hard. A spell to clean clothes, make Ars laugh, or stop his crying. He doesn't know a single one. It really makes him appreciate mom a lot more. Finally, after all the chaos, Ars falls asleep, looking absolutely adorable. Raising him has been rough, so rough it reminds Kakyu of his time in hell. But the moment he sees Ars' peaceful little face, it feels like his HP instantly recovers. He wishes Arno, Jui, and Alma could see how much Ars has grown. As he's about to drift off, he forces himself to stay awake. He can't sleep yet. Ars is napping, and that means it's time to get stuff done. Washing, chopping wood, tending to the livestock. It's all handled with magic, of course. Lastly, he gets to farming, plowing the wide fields to prepare for planting. Kakyu and Ars moved out of the village. They left Ural and crossed the ocean to the southern continent, settling in a country called Elvrent, deep in the forest. The move was because he killed the Holy Knights, and there was a chance the Church Nation could come after them. He doesn't think they can trace him with magic, but he's not taking any chances. Now, they're living in an ancient elf fortress he found ages ago. It's built into a cliffside, once guarding a highway, but now abandoned. Despite being in a tropical forest, the semi-underground rooms stay cool and comfortable. This place is one of the hideouts he kept from his wandering days before he settled in Yoln village. Now, it's their perfect hidden home. Even though they're tucked away deep in the forest, Kakyu isn't taking any chances. There are people with sharp senses, like the Holy Knights, so he set up a barrier to hide any trace of magic. Back in hell, his house would get demolished the day after he built it, so he's optimistic that if he expands this place, maybe one day he could turn it into a castle. After all, this is the dream home he's waited 2,000 years for. But then, a sudden explosion behind him snaps him out of his thoughts. Rushing inside to check on Rs, he finds the baby perfectly fine, though the roof? Not so much. There's a giant hole in it. Confused, Kakyu wonders what just happened until he sees Rs sneeze, and out comes a burst of fire. Looks like little Rs was born with magic powers. Kakyu was curious. He thought that was normal in this world, but most people in Yoln couldn't use magic. Then, one explanation pops into his mind. Dragon meat. For about 1.5 years, he shared his favorite dragon meat with the village whenever he returned. During that time, Rs was conceived and born. If the magical power of the dragon meat affected Jui's pregnancy, it could explain why Rs was born with dragon-like magic in his human body. Kakyu can't help but worry. Did he burden Rs with a dangerous inheritance? Living a normal life among humans could be difficult for the boy. And to make matters worse, Rs doesn't just sneeze fire, he also shoots out high-pressure water when he pees. To make his life easier, Kakyu created mini Kakyus, small puppets he could control at will. He set them to work on all sorts of tasks, but there was a catch. They only moved when he actively controlled them. No big deal though, he planned to raise Rs by himself anyway. Compared to 2,000 years of war in hell, raising a child should be a breeze. Outside their home, however, a group of goblins lurked behind the bushes, watching. Fast forward 2 weeks, and things weren't looking great. Kakyu was exhausted, holding a crying Rs in his arms. Between milk, diapers, late-night crying, and Rs escaping every 2 hours, Kakyu was barely keeping up. He'd calm the baby, then run to do chores, tend the fields, and care for the livestock. The food supplies were running low, and he knew he had to go hunting or get to work soon. But Rs wasn't making things any easier. A cough would cause an explosion, a laugh could whip up a tornado, and don't even get him started on the water cannons during bedwetting. Thunderstorms when he cried? Kakyu was sure this wasn't supposed to be a second life in hell. Utterly drained, all Kakyu wanted was 1 hour of sleep. Just one. After Rs finally dozed off, Kakyu couldn't help but stare at his adorable little face before passing out right beside him. In his sleep, Kakyu dreamed of an argument with his father. He wanted to continue his studies and pay rent with his own part-time job. His father never understood. He remembered walking into his room afterward, staring blankly at the altar for his late mother. Suddenly, Kakyu woke up with a start, sensing danger. 3 goblins were right behind him, ready to strike. Instinctively, Kakyu wiped them out with his bare hands, but something was wrong. Rs was gone. The crib was empty. The only possible explanation is Rs had been kidnapped right under his nose. Panicking, Kakyu bolted out of the house, activating his Devil Eye and Soul Seeker to track down the kidnappers who had fled into the forest. His mind was a mess as he ran, following their trail. Guilt gnawed at him. How could he have been so careless? He'd been too overconfident, thinking he could raise Rs all alone. Now all he could do was hope Rs was still safe. After rushing into the forest, Kakyu spotted an old man looking terrified and a female elf who was single-handedly defeating the goblins, all while holding Rs in her arms. Their eyes met. The elf was calm, while Kakyu's face was clearly filled with panic. His mind raced, wondering who this woman was, a dark elf and also a slave, here in the middle of nowhere. But his worry subsided as he noticed Rs waving his tiny hand at him. At first, Kakyu struggled to communicate with the old man due to the language barrier, desperately trying to explain that he was Rs' father. Luckily, the old man spoke a language Kakyu could understand. He explained that they were on their way to the holy city when they stumbled upon goblins carrying a baby. The old man then instructed the dark elf, Erza, to return the child to his father. Just as Erza moved to hand Rs over, she hesitated, pulling him back. She questioned whether Kakyu was truly the child's father, her suspicion rooted in the fact that they were in the Volki Great Forest, a place rumored to be home to a fire dragon. This unexplored jungle was far from the main road, and seeing a lightly dressed foreigner with a child seemed suspicious. He could easily be mistaken for a kidnapper. Her doubts forced Kakyu to pause and reflect. Was he truly a worthy father for Rs? He wasn't sure, but one thing he did know for certain: that child was the most precious person in his world. Kakyu's sincerity was so evident that Ursa apologized for her earlier suspicion. With that, Rs was safely returned to him. As they were about to part ways, Kakyu called out to her, expressing his deep gratitude for saving his son. Ursa, visibly shaken, brushed it off, reminding him that she was just a slave. Not long after, Kakyu and Rs went their separate way from Ursa and the old man, but something gnawed at him. He'd been avoiding it until she asked that question. He had always known that Rs only had him, and living this isolated life was meant to protect the boy. But deep down, Kakyu realized it wasn't entirely for Rs' sake. It was for his own. He had been scared of letting more people become important to them, of the pain that would come if he lost them. Kakyu had dragged Rs into this lonely life because of his own selfishness. In his fear, he had kept Rs from experiencing friendships, love, and dreams. But was that really what a father would do? Kakyu knew how it felt to care for others, and even though he feared the pain of loss, this time would be different. He vowed never to lose the people who mattered again. To become a true father and keep the promise he made that day, he whispered to Rs, asking what he should do next. Thinking back to the faces that should have been part of Rs' family, Arnaud, Jouy, and Elma, he finally knew what he needed to do. With renewed energy, Kakyu lifted Rs high into the air, determined to be the best father he could be. He had made up his mind. They would find someone to join them, to become part of their family, as a mother. In the depths of Heavenly Waterfall Canyon, located in the southern part of the Volki Great Forest, a group of adventurers hurried to escape, desperate to get out alive. They could hardly believe what they had just been through, convinced they had put enough distance between themselves and the dragon. One of them assured the others that they were protected by a barrier that concealed both their presence and their magical aura. The group had made heavy sacrifices, 8 combat slaves and 4 S-rank demon apes, just to sink the fire dragon into the waterfall basin. It seemed unthinkable that the dragon could have survived unscathed. But even so, they had obtained the dragon eggs to compensate for their losses, and they all appeared to have reached some sort of agreement about their next move. Suddenly, the ground began to tremble violently. Someone among them, keeping a close watch, noticed with shock that the dragon had survived. Even worse, it had evaporated the entire waterfall basin with a single blast of its fiery breath. Though clearly injured, the dragon managed to rise from the basin and fly westward, moving away from them. The group, still shielded by the barrier, could only wonder where it might be headed. Some thought it might be making its way toward a nearby town, convinced that if that were the case, the town would soon be nothing more than a memory. As they continued on, the fire dragon had now become a walking disaster. But before getting into Kakyu's story, here's the ranking system of demon beasts and demons. At the lowest level, goblins held an F rank, barely a threat. As the ranks rose, so did the danger. Wyverns, considered A rank, posed a significant challenge. Middle-rank demons were rated as S rank, but then there were special cases like dragons and higher-ranked demons, categorized under the rare and dreaded special S rank, the most fearsome of all. The scene shifts to a bustling marketplace, where people are crowding together, eager to get their hands on various goods. Kakyu and Rs were there too, though Kakyu felt a wave of nervousness wash over him. He hadn't been around so many people in ages. This wasn't just any market. It was Pomola, a port town along the Elbit River, the closest city to his hideout deep in the forest, about 80 kilometers to the north. Pomola was strategically located near the main highway that stretched across the country, making it a hub for overseas merchants who navigated the slow-flowing river. On the opposite side of that river lay the territory of the fire dragon, a place no human dared to venture. Thanks to its prime location, Pomola also had a thriving black market, notorious for its slave trade. Now you might be wondering why Kakyu and Rs were here. Well, the reason was simple. Kakyu needed to buy a slave to help him take care of Rs. After the kidnapping incident a few days ago, he realized raising Rs alone was no longer an option. He wasn't looking for a life partner. Marriage wasn't on his mind. What he needed was a caretaker, someone to ease the overwhelming burden of childcare he was feeling. As he wandered through the market, he couldn't help but notice the stares from the locals, making him feel a bit self-conscious. It didn't take long for him to figure out why. His outfit had caught the attention of two thugs watching him from a distance, clearly up to no good. Before he knew it, Kakyu found himself dodging the thugs, barely escaping their pursuit. Now, sitting at the edge of the street, Kakyu's eyes scanned the lines of slaves being paraded through the marketplace. This was turning out to be much harder than he thought. None of the slaves he saw seemed like good candidates for what he needed, a reliable person to help him raise Rs. In this country, slaves were usually criminals who lost their freedom. But what Kakyu was after was different. He needed someone trustworthy enough to be left alone with Rs, and capable of handling Rs' occasional magic outbursts. So far, it seemed like finding such a person was going to be a serious challenge. Actually, there was one perfect candidate, 𝚁𝚎𝚗𝚗, the dark elf he met in the forest the other day. She was strong, reliable, and well-educated. She was exactly what Kakyu needed, but he let the opportunity slip. Now, he was frustrated at the thought of having missed his chance and doubted he'd find anyone like her again. While Kakyu was stuck figuring out his next move, he overheard two people talking excitedly about a major opportunity. They were certain, based on what they heard from merchants, that Sēbās of keen insight was coming to town. It wasn't publicly announced, so it sounded like a big hush-hush business deal could be happening soon. Kakyu's ears perked up. Could they be talking about 𝙶𝚎𝚗𝚗𝚑? He'd heard plenty of rumors about him. Sēbās was the president of the massive 𝚎𝚗𝚗 company, dealing in everything from food and gold to, most importantly, slaves. In just one generation, he'd become the top merchant on the entire continent, even supplying the Lawrence royal family. This guy was a serious big shot. For Kakyu, this was fantastic news. Even as a wood merchant from across the sea, he knew Sēbās by name. If anyone had what Kakyu needed, it was definitely Sēbās. With that in mind, Kakyu and Rs had their new goal for the day: track down Sēbās of keen insight and become acquainted with him. Meanwhile, across the Elbit River in an abandoned house near Pʟmola, 𝚁𝚎𝚗 sat quietly, lost in thought. She kept replaying the encounter she had with that strange man in the Völkī forest. Why had she trusted him so easily? After everything she'd been through, she thought she'd lost her ability to trust anyone. Just then, a voice called out, telling her the ship was ready. It was the old man who was with 𝚁𝚎𝚗, she understood, and got up from her seat. Finally, the identity of the old man who was with 𝚁𝚎𝚗 was known. He was Sēbās, the very man everyone in town was talking about. Back in the bustling streets of Pʟmola, Kakyu found himself in a ridiculous chase. An angry old dwarf was hot on his heels, shouting about his shop being burned to the ground. In truth, it wasn't even Kakyu's fault. Rs had sneezed and accidentally set the place on fire. Running for his life, Kakyu ducked into an alleyway, only to find himself cornered in a dead end. The dwarf caught up, fuming. Kakyu, trying to calm things down, offered to pay for the damages, but the dwarf wasn't having it. He called Kakyu a swindler, convinced he was being tricked. Just as things seemed at their worst, the crowd around them started panicking, pointing to the sky. Kakyu looked up, heart sinking, as a massive fire dragon roared overhead, burning down buildings left and right. His chest tightened, not because he was afraid to fight it, but because he feared for Rs. He couldn't let anything happen to him. Kakyu had no idea why the fire dragon was here, but the chaos was actually a blessing in disguise. Maybe now he could escape. But as flames engulfed the town, memories of his own village burning flashed before his eyes. His heart raced, torn between running and facing the destruction head-on. His emotions churned. Should he really just run away again? As Sēbās and 𝚁𝚎𝚗's ship approached Pʟmola, the sight ahead stunned them. Chaos, flames, and the unmistakable roar of a fire dragon. Sebas immediately suggested they turn around and head back to the shore, but 𝚤𝚌 wasn't having it. She spotted the slave children lagging behind in their desperate escape. Without a second thought, she leaped off the ship, sprinting from boat to boat, racing toward the burning harbor. Meanwhile, Kakyu stood frozen in the city center, gripped by indecision. If he fought the dragon, he'd risk exposing himself to everyone. Worse, if he actually defeated it, the church would certainly learn about his existence. Should he really put ours in danger just to save a bunch of strangers? He kept telling himself that leaving was the right call, that he wasn't wrong. But deep down, doubt gnawed at him. Before Kakyu could make a move, a sudden anchor flew through the air, wrapping around the dragon's left leg. The chain yanked tight, restraining the beast's movements. Kakyu's eyes widened in surprise. The anchor had come from one of the ships at the harbor. And then, like a blur, 𝚤𝚌 sprinted along the chain, moving swiftly toward the dragon. She dodged a blast of fiery breath, and with a powerful leap, landed right on the creature's face. Swinging her dual swords, she aimed for the dragon's back. The attack landed, but it barely scratched the surface, the dragon's tough scales proving nearly impenetrable. One of her swords snapped under the pressure. Undeterred, 𝚤𝚌 quickly improvised. She tied a rope to the broken sword and flung it around the dragon's leg, using it to swing herself above the beast. From this new position, she slashed at its wings with all her might. Her blade tore through the left wing, sending the dragon spiraling out of control, crashing to the ground. The fight was far from over, but now the advantage was hers. Standing atop a nearby building, 𝚤𝚌 locked eyes with the grounded dragon, ready for the next round. Kakyu realized in an instant who was battling the fire dragon. It was 𝚤𝚌, the dark elf he had encountered before. The dragon's sluggish movements were a result of the many wounds it had already sustained, though 𝚤𝚌 didn't seem to understand why the creature was so furious and attacking the town. She knew her chances of winning were slim, but at the very least, she believed she could buy enough time for the townspeople to escape. 𝚤𝚌 had cast the dusk spell, blinding the dragon temporarily, and strengthened her body with magic to move at a speed that allowed her to freely attack the beast. The townspeople cheered, convinced that the dragon could be defeated, but Kakyu didn't see it that way. It was obvious to him that despite 𝚤𝚌's relentless efforts, she was barely doing any real damage, and the hits she was taking were starting to show. He knew that if things continued like this, she would soon be too exhausted to fight. Concerned about the growing danger, Kakyu urged the crowd to flee, but just as things were looking grim, 𝚤𝚌 was sent flying into a nearby building. The falling debris from the impact threatened the people below, but 𝚤𝚌 managed to stop it in time. However, she was clearly off balance, and Kakyu noticed that the dragon was preparing to unleash a fiery breath on the densely populated area. The flames swept toward the crowded streets, causing people to scatter in every direction, desperate to save their lives. In the chaos, Kakyu managed to reach 𝚤𝚌 in a small alley. He felt grateful, recalling how she had saved him the other day, and knew he couldn't let the person who had protected his son die here. Without much time to spare, Kakyu remembered something important, how 𝚤𝚌 had cast a binding spell earlier. He needed her to do it again, but this time, it had to be strong enough to blind everyone in town. 𝚤𝚌 looked confused by request, but then she trembled at Kakyu's serious face, wondering if she could do it. She can do it, but only for a short period of time. That's enough. That was all Kakyu needed to execute his plan. After handing ours to 𝚤𝚌, Kakyu turned back toward the dragon with resolve. He wasn't going to let the dragon take any more lives. It was time to end this. 𝚤𝚌 was speechless for a moment, then she let out a laugh. Without hesitation, she cast the spell Kakyu had requested. As she did, a thought crossed her mind. Just like before, she felt a strange certainty that Kakyu was telling the truth. She couldn't explain it, but she trusted him. Meanwhile, Kakyu casually walked toward the fire dragon, even calling out to it, daring the beast to notice him. The dragon didn't hesitate and immediately launched an attack. But with a single, precise strike to its chest, Kakyu ended the dragon's life in an instant. 𝚤𝚌 stood in awe, unable to believe how effortlessly he had taken down the massive creature. Amid the chaos, Kakyu calmly approached 𝙭𝚻, who was holding Rs in her arms. Without a word, he knelt down in front of her, as if proposing. Then, with a serious tone, he made his request. He wanted 𝙭𝚻 to become this child's mother. A few months ago, in the magical land of Lurence, within the royal castle's inner sanctum, 𝚤𝚤 was given a secret mission. Known as 𝚤𝚻 of the Dusk, a trusted operative of the royal family, she was tasked by a mysterious man. He told her that tonight, at the old knight's quarters, a dark guild merchant would be meeting a noble to exchange a forbidden magic tool, one that could threaten the safety of the entire kingdom. Her mission? Assassinate the merchant before the deal goes down. 𝚤𝚻 executed her mission flawlessly, silently killing a masked figure for the future of her country. But as her blade pierced his chest, the voice that escaped the masked man was shockingly familiar. Her heart sank. It was the king. She had been set up. 𝚤𝚻 immediately realized she was trapped. But it was too late. The kingdom enslaved her for regicide. She tried to defend herself, insisting she was only following orders from Eliud Lurence, the first prince. But the truth had already been twisted. 𝚤𝚻 cried out that it was a conspiracy and warned that the royal family was still in danger, but no one listened. Even her brother didn't come to her aid. While sitting in her prison cell, 𝚤𝚻 overheard rumors from the guards. They whispered about the king being in a coma, how the kingdom feared retaliation from the Shadow Clan if she were executed, and their disappointment that she hadn't been sentenced to death. They assumed no one would buy a slave who betrayed the crown, and now 𝚬𝚑 was stuck with the task of selling her. 𝚤𝚻's mind was in turmoil, finally realizing she'd been set up. Trust felt impossible now. She questioned how the people she trusted most had brought her down so easily. Guilt gripped her. With her own hands, she had nearly killed the king, a man she respected and loved like a father. She couldn't forgive herself. There was no way to come back from this. Just then, 𝚬𝚑 arrived, pulling her from the filthy cell. With his help, they made their way to Elvrant, the land of the elves, where someone might be interested in buying her. To avoid inspections, they took the old Volki road through Nagraja. While passing through the Volki forest, they encountered a goblin carrying a baby. Driven by a desperate need to atone, 𝚤𝚻 saved the child, Rs. She wanted to make up for her past, but had no idea how. At a time when the world seemed to be rejecting her, Kakyu thanked her for saving his son. Back to the present moment, Kakyu suddenly asked her to become Rs's mother. 𝚤𝚻 was stunned by the request, and both of them turned red with embarrassment. Kakyu's words had slipped out, and he quickly realized he hadn't meant it that way. Kakyu nervously tried to clarify his words, but before he could finish, 𝚬𝚑 arrived and called out to 𝚤𝚻. That's when Kakyu realized the old man with her was 𝚬𝚑. His timing was awkward though. He'd walked in on them holding hands and felt like he was intruding. As they reached the city, 𝚬𝚑 spotted the dragon's corpse and wondered if 𝚤𝚻 was behind it. 𝚤𝚻 was about to explain, but Kakyu jumped in, yapping away with some made-up story. 𝚤𝚻's attention shifted to a group of children 𝚬𝚑 had saved. They were clearly illegal slaves, as they bore no magic marks, and they were terrified of the dragon, crying to go home. 𝚤𝚻 calmed them, hugging them close and offering words of comfort. 𝚬𝚑 and his men planned to send the children to the church in the holy city, but he asked 𝚤𝚻 what she wanted to do. 𝚬𝚑 had already heard Kakyu intended to buy her as a slave. Kakyu confirmed this, but said he needed to ask her something first. He reintroduced himself as a mid-level merchant from the Ural Kingdom, far to the north beyond the Luria Sea. Then, he reiterated his request. He wanted 𝚤𝚻 to be this child's mother, or in other words, to be his wife. He explained that after seeing her bravery, he knew she had something he lacked. Most importantly, she was someone he could trust. If she agreed, he would annul the slave contract. He wanted her to answer as an equal, not as a slave. With a heavy heart, 𝚤𝚻 refused. She couldn't accept freedom without atoning for her crime. She confessed that she had committed a serious offense that deserved the death penalty, and in her eyes, she was not worthy of becoming a mother. Although disappointed, Kakyu tried to stay upbeat, apologizing for his unreasonable request. Breaking the silence, 𝚬𝚑 mentioned he needed some time to prepare for their departure. 𝚤𝚤 offered to help, but 𝚬𝚑 declined, saying her injuries would just slow him down. He asked her to rest, while secretly wanting to give Kakyu more time to reassure her. A little while later, Kakyu was tending to 𝚤𝚤's wounds while she held baby R's. As he carefully treated her battered legs, Kakyu used his devil's eye to read her true emotions. He could sense a deep mix of disappointment, suspicion, anger, and a lingering loyalty to someone who likely betrayed her. Her soul was in turmoil, weighed down by regret and guilt. That was probably why she refused his offer. The issue had deeper roots. Most people would have broken down by now, but 𝚤𝚤 remained calm, hiding her inner turmoil to keep others from worrying. Was it her dark elf nature, or perhaps a motherly instinct she'd had since birth? Either way, Kakyu felt even more drawn to her. He needed that kind of devotion. After he finished treating her wounds, there was an awkward tension between them. But when 𝚤𝚤 looked at Kakyu, she began to understand why she trusted him. From the beginning, he'd asked her to take care of his son, showing his faith in her. No one had ever trusted her this much before. As she started to open up, fear crept in. What if she was betrayed again? She hesitated, still afraid to trust anyone. Breaking the heavy mood, Kakyu gently told her he didn't agree with her claim that she wasn't fit to be a mother. He didn't know the crime she'd committed, but he knew the hands she thought were stained with sin had saved countless lives. To him, that was all that mattered. Despite her past mistakes, she still risked her life to do the right thing, and Kakyu needed that strength for both him and ours. 𝚤𝚤 wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered. Sensing her hesitation, Kakyu gently pressed further, asking, is endlessly suffering really the atonement she wants? If her crime deserved the death penalty, she'd be trapped in slavery forever, forced into hard labor, and maybe even accused of things she didn't do. Is that really what she thinks atonement should be? 𝚤𝚤 realized how deeply she had sunk into guilt, unsure if giving up was her only way to pay for her mistakes. The idea of happiness with Kakyu seemed beyond her reach, so she clung to punishment instead. She burst out, telling him that someone as strong as him could never understand her feelings. Their argument startled R's awake, and he began crying loudly, cutting through the tension. 𝚤𝚤's instinct took over, and she quickly comforted the child. Kakyu watched with a soft smile, acknowledging that, while he was strong, he couldn't care for R's in the way she could. He admitted he was bad at tasks like changing diapers, and had once been so distracted that his son had been kidnapped. He remarked that strength and honesty alone weren't enough to navigate life, which was why they needed each other. Kakyu offered to help her find a way to atone, as long as she helped him raise his son. He wanted to understand what atonement meant to her, believing the answer would come in time. This caused 𝚤𝚤 to recall her past, especially the sense of justice she once held dear. She remembered visiting an orphanage with the king, realizing that his quiet visits were part of his atonement for the centuries of war he had waged. For 1,000 years, his wars had orphaned countless children, the very future of the kingdom. The king had advised her during their conversation that someday she might need to dirty her hands for the sake of the kingdom. He told her that when that time came, she must remember that her power was meant for the future of the children. This memory brought clarity to 𝚤𝚤, helping her realize that her true atonement lay in continuing the king's will, creating a world where children could grow up laughing and happy. Seeing this shift in her, Kakyu smiled and offered his hand, suggesting they start by ensuring their child could laugh happily. Though 𝚤𝚤 hesitated, haunted by the betrayal from her past, Kakyu took her hand firmly. He reassured her, confidently promising that he would never betray her and would prove it. Back when 𝚤𝚤 made the bold decision to leap toward Pʟmola, 𝚬𝚑 couldn't help but feel a wave of anxiety. One of his subordinates suggested they head back to shore immediately, clearly against the idea of following 𝚤𝚤. He couldn't understand why 𝚬𝚑 was so willing to risk everything, crossing dangerous borders for someone who was just a slave. But 𝚬𝚑 had his own code. Caring for everyone, even a mere slave, was part of his belief. Plus, someone important had personally asked him to show her the respect she deserved. Back in the present, Erza found herself completely disoriented, unsure of what had just happened. Kakyu only chuckled, explaining it was teleportation magic. It was her first time after all, but what really threw her off was their sudden appearance high in the sky, with their sweet home clearly visible below. A few hours earlier, back in an abandoned house in Pʟmola, Erza had wondered about proof that Kakyu wouldn't betray her. His solution is simple. He uses the slave contract. Then, Kakyu gets a magic mark placed on his chest, and Sébas explains that slave contracts were a form of seal magic that enforced a master-servant relationship. Normally, it allowed masters to bind slaves and control their freedom. But Kakyu seemed oddly excited about the idea, laughing as if it was no big deal. Erza was baffled, unsure of what he was trying to prove. Kakyu then explained with a grin that from now on, they would be both each other's master and slave. Thanks to the mutual slave contract, betrayal would be impossible. Seeing the bizarre agreement unfold, Sébas couldn't help but comment that it was almost like a marriage. To finalize the contract, they sealed the deal, literally, by exchanging blood on each other's marks. Now, in the Volki Great Forest at Kakyu's base, the trio had safely arrived. Erza had even changed into a maid outfit, ready for this new chapter of her life. Kakyu proudly showed her around, explaining that the place was an old fort he had renovated, perfect for a hidden base. As they stepped inside, the mess was undeniable. Stuff was scattered everywhere, and the room looked more like a storage unit than a living space. Erza tried to adjust to the strange surroundings, noticing a corner emanating dark magic. Bones and skins from dragons and other powerful beasts piled up, with Kakyu explaining that he'd been collecting them over time. Selling them all at once would look suspicious, so the stash just kept growing. Erza couldn't stop questioning who this man really was. Everything about him seemed far beyond normal. He had defeated a dragon effortlessly and used teleportation and flying magic without a single incantation. The more she thought about it, the more she was convinced that Kakyu had to be someone extraordinary. Maybe a legendary hero, or even a demon general. His claim of being just a mid-level merchant from the north sounded ridiculous. His face, with that sly grin, only added to her suspicions, reminding her of a swindler. Still, despite all that, he had extended his hand to help her seek atonement. Then, he had wanted to go over the terms of their contract, reminding her of the agreement. She would become R's mother, and in return, he would help her make amends for her past. Her own path to atonement involved helping orphans, so she resolved to begin by being the best mother she could be. While Kakyu went to take care of the fields and livestock before sunset, Erza was set to work cleaning the house. Time passed quickly as she busied herself with the chores, cleaning the messy room and putting R's to sleep. But as she worked, unease started to creep in. Watching Mini Kakyu move around and assist him with the tasks stirred a feeling of suspicion. She couldn't shake the thought that he was hiding from something. After all, what would drive someone as powerful as him into hiding? Was there a deeper plan at work? She tried not to dwell on it because she also has a dark past. Kakyu had done nothing but try to prove himself, saving her, becoming her slave, and earning her trust bit by bit. She knew, deep down, she already trusted him. The real problem wasn't him, it was her. With her hands stained by her past actions, she couldn't help but wonder if she was truly fit to be a mother. As these doubts consumed her, she didn't realize how exhausted she was. By the time Kakyu returned and opened the door, he found her lying on the floor, unconscious. In her dream, Erza was back in her oldest memories, reliving moments she thought she'd forgotten. She saw herself, much younger, training alongside her real brother. In their village, all the men became warriors, and the women, if talented enough, could join them. But during training, the fighters were separated from the non-combatants. It was the village law. Even her real mother wasn't around much. Her father, the village chief, was a strict teacher, and if she didn't give it her all, she'd fall behind her brother and friends, the ones she competed with every day. In her small world, it was like she didn't even have a mother. At least, that's how she remembered it. Suddenly, Erza's eyes fluttered open and reality slowly came back to her. She was lying in bed, hooked up to an IV drip. Beside her was Kakyu, asleep but clearly having stayed by her side the whole time. She whispered his name, and he woke up in a panic, tears in his eyes. He was overwhelmed with relief, telling her she had been unconscious for 2.5 days, and he was beyond grateful that she'd finally woken up. Hearing this, Erza tried to sit up, but Kakyu gently stopped her, reminding her she still had a slight fever. It was no surprise, given her injuries. He felt guilty for not letting her rest properly after that fight, even apologizing for his inability to use healing magic. That last part caught her off guard. Erza hadn't realized there was magic Kakyu couldn't use. While he changed the fever compress on her forehead, he admitted there were limits to his abilities. If only he could use every type of magic, he joked, that would be pretty amazing. Then, the sound of R's crying broke the moment. It was time for his milk. Kakyu needed to go, but before leaving, he handed Erza a small doll. If she needed anything, she could call him through it. It was a portable mini Kakyu, enchanted with a spell that allowed the doll's owner to communicate with him, no matter how far apart they were. He also mentioned he had prepared some vegetable soup in advance. With preservation magic cast on it, it would stay warm and fresh, ready for her to eat whenever she felt up to it. As Kakyu left Erza's room, reminding her to eat slowly, she couldn't help but smile softly, without even realizing it. Glancing around, she noticed the little details: maid clothes hanging up, a work desk covered in documents and herbs, and a pile of bandages. It hit her. While she was unconscious, he'd taken care of her and a baby at the same time. That thought brought back a memory of her own mother. Back when she was seriously injured during training, bedridden just like now, her mother had been there too, watching over her. Erza couldn't recall much of the conversation, but she had a strong feeling her mom had apologized to her. The mother rebelled against her father back then, and her cheek had been bruised. The memory wasn't anything special, yet just having her mom beside her was one of the happiest moments of her childhood. That's how a mother figure is, she realized. Even if the child messes up or becomes a stranger to you, if you give it your all as a parent, the love will reach them. With that thought, Erza felt she could do it too, become the mother Rs needed. With renewed determination, she sat up, ready to eat the soup Kakyu had prepared for her. The IV in her hand was a minor inconvenience, so she casually removed it and reached for the warm, fragrant soup. She blew gently on it and took a taste. It was just what she needed. Soup after a rainstorm always had a special kind of comfort. The next day, Erza was back on her feet, feeling strong. Before Kakyu could even ask how she was doing, Rs was already crawling away, trying to escape his diaper change. And of course, the room was a mess again, even though Erza had just cleaned it before she fainted. Things got even worse when Rs started crying. His thunder magic outburst acted up, and well, now there was a hole in the wall again. And so, their journey as this strange little family had just begun. Right before Kakyu and Erza made their contract, 𝚬𝚗 was shocked when Kakyu said he wanted to become a slave. Kakyu had his reasons, but without a legitimate excuse, it'd be illegal. So, Kakyu devised a plan. He'd buy Erza, but since he didn't have enough money, he'd borrow from 𝚬𝚗 and become a debt slave. Then, Erza would buy him, even though she didn't have the cash. Kakyu had thought this through, pulling out a bunch of magic beast materials from his magic bag to give to her. 𝚬𝚗 looked pleased. The materials were worth more than enough. Erza, on the other hand, was confused. Why go through such a complicated process? Kakyu explained it was his way of showing that he trusted her, leaving Erza blushing from embarrassment. After they started living together, Erza had one complaint. Why do they always end up in the air after teleporting? Kakyu explained that without setting specific markers, his teleportation could only get them to a general location, and appearing in the sky was better than accidentally popping up underground or underwater. When Erza pressed him on why he hadn't set any markers, Kakyu admitted it was just troublesome. But with her insistence, he quickly set one to avoid future scoldings. Not long after, they were about to have their first family meeting. The topic? R's magic outbursts. This kid is cute, but terrifying when he loses it. Before we dive into that, here's a quick rundown. In the human realm, humanoids are split into various races, but they're all lumped together as humans. There are 5 main races here: humans, elves, including dark elves, dragonfolk, dwarves, and beastfolk. Now, why did they even need a family meeting? It all started that morning when Erza was tidying up the yard before waking Kakyu. She juggled everything, cleaning the house, changing R's diaper, and bathing the little guy. It had only been 2 days since Erza recovered from her fever, but their daily routine had already changed a lot. With the chores split up, Kakyu had more time for training, and he'd gotten better at controlling his mini Kakyus. Erza was super capable and knew how to do everything, but one thing bothered him. When it came to feeding Rs, the baby only wanted Erza. Rs was getting way more attached to Erza, and that fired up Kakyu's competitive spirit. Sure, Erza could make breakfast, but he wasn't about to lose. So he cooked up a horned boar steak with confidence, hoping to show he could be just as reliable. When it was done, it looked delicious, and Erza said it tasted amazing. But Kakyu knew something was off. It was sweet, like he'd mistook sugar for salt. Erza, though, said every family has its own special flavors, and almost took over the kitchen herself. That's when reality hit him. She's just too good at everything. Could he even keep up? Just as he was grappling with that thought, Rs started crying. Kakyu stepped up, thinking the baby needed to poop, but nope, he needed to pee. And this was the second time Erza witnessed one of Rs' magic outbursts, which led her to suggest the family meeting. She couldn't shake off how strange it all seemed. Kakyu had already told her that Rs was born a little special, but this wasn't about that. Erza realized something odd. Rs only used magic when Kakyu was the one looking after him. Kakyu tried to stay calm, but thinking back, she was right. Erza concluded that he was the reason for Rs' magical outbursts. At first, they thought R's magic was just out of control, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe Kakyu had been using magic to keep Rs entertained, and every time Rs had an outburst, Kakyu just smiled instead of getting upset. Now, Rs probably thought that using magic made Kakyu happy. Erza's explanation hit home, and Kakyu started to panic because she was absolutely right. He slumped into a corner, realizing this was all his fault, muttering about how he'd failed as a parent. Erza, trying to comfort him, suggested that now that they understood the cause, they could probably control Rs' outbursts. She reassured him that as long as he kept trying his best, Rs would sense his good intentions. Kakyu, however, misunderstood, seeing how Erza handled everything so much better than him, and he felt like absolute trash. Meanwhile, Erza suspected Rs was just trying to make Kakyu happy in his own way. In a fit of frustration, Kakyu had raised his voice at Rs, startling the baby and causing him to cry. Predictably, another fire magic outburst occurred, striking Kakyu just as it always did. A few days passed, and sure enough, Erza was right. Once Kakyu changed the way he interacted with Rs as she suggested, the magical outburst stopped. However, Kakyu found himself in the wheat field, lost in thought, questioning whether he was truly needed in the family. He quickly pushed that thought aside, convincing himself that he was the only one who could manage the livestock and field skills he'd learned in Yolen. When the wheat ripened, they wouldn't have to worry about food for a while, or so he hoped. But then the rains came, lasting for days and completely destroying the wheat field. Erza, knowing a bit about farming, explained that crops from the north just weren't suited for this climate. That only worsened Kakyu's self-esteem. Everything he tried seemed to blow up in his face, and on top of it all, Rs was still attached solely to Erza, fueling his jealousy even more. Kakyu took a deep breath, slapped his cheeks, and made up his mind. He had to leave the house for a while. The ruined wheat fields were a disaster, and he needed to figure out how to bring in some money. His plan? Head to the Holy City's merchant guild and make something happen. Arriving in Astraga, the bustling heart of the Elvrant Federal Kingdom, Kakyu wasted no time. The guild staff were wide-eyed when he handed over his credentials, especially the letter from Sebas. It was clear this wasn't an ordinary registration. With everything in place, Kakyu was ready to make some connections and gather information. Before long, he met Rᴇɪṛᴜ and Shūren, Lawrence merchants, who filled him in on the tough situation in the region. It seemed the Elbet River had flooded again, closing roads and making it impossible for traders to move goods. To make matters worse, a fire dragon had appeared recently, and the dark guilds had fought over its remains. The winner, Viridra, had sealed off the roads, leaving the remaining route overrun with dangerous magic beasts. Shūren added that getting help from knights or hunters was out of the question. They were all too busy dealing with other issues, and the rainy season had even drawn aquatic magic beasts into the area. Kakyu asked why they didn't just take the sea route, and Shūren snapped back, saying they didn't have the money for it. The next day, Kakyu shocked them both by presenting a magic beast's leg. Shūren couldn't believe it, accusing him of lying. How could he have killed the beast when he had been in town the day before? Kakyu smiled and claimed he'd hired mercenaries to handle it for him. The truth? There were no mercenaries. Kakyu had taken care of the beasts on his own. Suspicion crept into the air as Rᴇɪṛᴜ and Shūren wondered what Kakyu really wanted. They were poor merchants after all, but Kakyu had everything under control. His plan was simple. In exchange for the beast's leg, he wanted access to market prices, sales channels, and a few key introductions to their business partners. That night, Kakyu filled Erza in on his day, including the two merchants he met. Apparently, they were siblings and salt traders. They'd agreed to introduce him to a shipping company they worked with. Erza, speaking through her portable mini Erza, was impressed by how much he'd accomplished in just 2 days. Of course, that praise went straight to Kakyu's head. He loved hearing it. He didn't want to feel useless. Kakyu mentioned that he'd be busy the next day, so he might not be able to answer her calls. Erza understood and wished him luck, which only fueled his excitement. He couldn't wait to show Ars that even he could be a reliable dad. The next day, with the help of the sibling merchant, Kakyu struck a deal with Silga, a shipping merchant from Elvrond. Silga was impressed by Kakyu's supposed connections with powerful mercenaries, especially during the risky rainy season. Just as Kakyu was getting into the flow of the meeting, he heard the chime of an incoming call. It was Erza. Ignoring the call for now, he pressed on with his business. Today had to go well. He had been feeling like a failure at home, and if he couldn't succeed here, then what was he good for? Eventually, the meeting wrapped up successfully, though Kakyu was feeling a bit hazy from the alcohol that had been passed around. That night, as he collapsed onto the bed at the inn, he couldn't stop thinking about how well everything had gone. He couldn't wait to bask in the praise when he got home. But then, the memory of the ignored call hit him like a brick. Panic set in as he remembered the golem had been ringing all day. Frantically, he calls back. The moment Erza answered, it became clear why she'd been trying to reach him. Ars had fallen ill. Sweat poured down Kakyu's face as he teleported home in a rush. When he burst through the door, hot steam greeted him, and there was Erza, looking panicked. She explained that Ars had developed a fever around noon, but it started burning up in the last half hour. She didn't know what to make of it. No rash, normal breathing, but she'd never seen a fever like this before. Kakyu's mind was racing, panic washing over him. How could he make a remedy if he didn't even know the cause? Thoughts swirled with worry and self-blame until Erza snapped him out of it. She told him she was going to gather herbs that usually helped with fevers. Kakyu tried to stop her. It was the middle of the night and raining heavily, but Erza insisted, saying she could see well in the dark. Besides, he should stay with Ars, not her. That stung. Kakyu already felt useless, and her words only deepened the feeling. But then Ars, feverish and weak, grasped his finger with his tiny hand as if comforting him. It was the first time Kakyu truly saw his son offering him strength, even in such a vulnerable state. Before long, Erza returned, faster than expected, holding a strange branch. She explained it was from the Devil's Walking Stick, a magical tree that grows rapidly by absorbing large amounts of magic power. Without wasting time, she tied the branch to Ars' arm, and the tree immediately sprouted, glowing warmly as its branches spread out. Relief flooded her. It worked, just like she had hoped. She'd heard of this from a village elder long ago. Sometimes babies from powerful magical races, like elves, couldn't control their growing magic, causing fevers like ours. The devil's walking stick absorbed his excess magic, and soon the fever would break. Kakyu's knees buckled with relief. He couldn't have done any of this without Erza. He praised her, but at the same time, he couldn't help but berate himself. He had been so focused on his own shortcomings that he'd ignored everything happening around him. He'd made a contract with Erza because he couldn't do it alone, but instead, he'd let jealousy take over. He tried to make up for his failures with work, and in the process, had neglected Rs. Erza spoke softly, sharing how when Kakyu wasn't around, Rs would cry endlessly, especially when the fever hit. But when Kakyu was near, Rs would calm down, and honestly, she felt the same way. That night, they opened up to each other about their insecurities and shortcomings. Kakyu realized that Rs's occasional magic outbursts must have kept Rs's power in check. They agreed to use the devil's walking stick regularly to prevent future flare-ups. The next morning, Erza cooked breakfast, but what Kakyu saw on the plate was the stuff of nightmares. Sautéed goat hoof and bear paw with a suspiciously undercooked mushroom sauce. He pushed the horror out of his mind and forced himself to eat. Moments later, he collapsed, unable to endure it any longer. From that point on, it was decided that Kakyu would handle the cooking from then on. A little while later, Kakyu dreamt of meeting Arnaud and Jours at a bar. They talked about children. Arnaud said he feels responsible, knowing he has to protect them or they might die, and that helps him grow as a parent. Kakyu started to understand. Living for R's sake gives him purpose. Arnaud could see Kakyu slowly becoming a proper dad. Then, Jours chimed in, saying all that's left is for Kakyu to become a good husband, though he's already trying his best. Arnaud teased him, asking if he'd kissed her yet. Embarrassed, Kakyu quickly pointed out that their relationship was just a contract. Jours jumped in, saying Alma would be disappointed if she heard that. It's not that Kakyu dislikes Erza, he's just aware he's a demon, not a human or an elf. Arnaud pushed further, teasing Kakyu for never kissing a woman despite his age, and even demonstrated how to kiss one, much to Kakyu's disgust. Kakyu woke up in a panic, accidentally bumping heads with Erza. When he asked what she was doing, Erza, with flushed cheeks and ears, said it was morning and she was just trying to wake him up. Now, a year had passed in the Volki Great Forest of the Elvrent Federal Kingdom. It was July 1014 in the Holy Calendar. Their days were filled with memories, and they had even decorated a wall with countless photos of Rs, capturing every moment with their makeshift camera. Rs, now able to walk, peeked at his dad tending to the goats. Despite his clumsy speech, his curiosity was obvious. Kakyu scooped him up, letting him get a closer look at the newborn goat, and explained, "This little guy was born this morning. You're the big brother now, so you need to be gentle." Rs lit up at the new title, beaming with pride. And of course, today was special. It was Rs's birthday. It had been a year since Kakyu started raising Rs. Not knowing his actual birthday, Kakyu decided the day he found him would be the one. To celebrate, Kakyu gifted Rs an encyclopedia of magical creatures, while Erza gave him guidebooks for 2 major languages and a historical compendium. The two immediately started bickering about whose gift was better, each defending their choice. Rs, watching his parents argue, began to tremble and with a tearful voice said, "Fighting is bad." Both of them melted at the sight, and their little spat quickly ended in laughter. They spent the day teaching Rs, with Kakyu reading from the encyclopedia and Erza diving into languages and history. Their days were filled with joy and Rs' growing energy. One morning, dressed in full gear with a bug-catching net, Rs announced his plan. He wanted to catch the creatures he'd seen in the encyclopedia. Kakyu and Erza couldn't help but smile as they followed him into the woods, watching their adventurous little one chase after insects. Rs was excited, and soon enough, he caught a grasshopper, proudly showing it off. Kakyu grinned, remembering how he used to catch bugs as a kid. Hearing this, Erza smiled, imagining Kakyu as a little boy, wishing she could have seen it. Her teasing only made Kakyu blush, especially as he remembered Arno's words from his dream. He still hadn't kissed her yet. Suddenly, something flew by, making Erza cling to Kakyu in fear. It was just a bat, but their close proximity left them both flustered. Their awkward moment was cut short by Ars, who pointed excitedly into the forest. Confused, they followed his gaze, only to see a baby fire dragon lying in the woods. Ars, in his innocence, declared the dragon as his little brother, recalling Kakyu's earlier comment about him being the big brother to the baby goat. Erza, alarmed, tried to pull Ars away, but he was determined to protect the dragon, ignoring her protests. Her sharp gaze sent the baby dragon flying off into the deeper forest, leaving Ars in tears over the loss of his brother. That day, Ars cried himself to sleep, and the next morning, he kept glancing toward the forest with a sad, concerned expression. Meanwhile, Kakyu was running late. There was a big auction in Pʟmola today, and he needed to leave early. In his rush, he accidentally tore his treasured gloves, a gift from Alma. Panic set in, but with no time to fix it, he tossed them on the living room table, promising to deal with it later. Erza, of course, couldn't leave things lying around with a curious Ars on the loose. Spotting the torn gloves, a mischievous idea popped into her head. The scene shifts to Port Town, Pʟmola, at the bustling auction hall. Bidders eagerly placed offers on a slave up for grabs, and in the crowd was Kakyu, quietly observing until Shuren called him over. Ever since Vridra took control, people's attitudes have become more aggressive. As the auction unfolded, whispers spread about Kakyu, the guy with a powerful team of mercenaries at his command. His fabricated story had become the talk of the town. Then, the auctioneer introduced a new item, a 20-year-old wine from the Kalamira Church Nation, starting at 20,000. The bidding war kicked off, and after a heated exchange, Kakyu secured the wine for a whopping 200,000. He needed that wine badly. It had been almost a year since he met his wife, a devout woman who always dreamed of visiting the sacred church nation. He figured the least he could do was let her taste the wine from there. Later, Silga reached into his coat and handed Kakyu a small token of appreciation. He said it was nothing special. As Kakyu opened the gift by the harbor, he was stunned. It was a really stunning couple's ring. At that moment, his mind flashed back to his dream of Arno and Jui. Over the past year, Kakyu realized he had fallen for Erza. But there was a catch. He was a demon, fundamentally different from other creatures. His existence was tied to his soul, with his body merely acting as a vessel of magical energy. Demons can't reproduce like normal beings. They increase their numbers by forming contracts with the souls of the dead, turning them into demons, just as Satan had done with him. That's why Kakyu lacked the natural instincts or abilities for reproduction. He could sense Erza's feelings without even delving into her soul. But he questioned whether his own feelings were real, or just lingering remnants from his time as a human, wondering if he really has the qualifications to give her this ring. Lost in memories of Aelma, something that still tugged at his heart, Kakyu stood at the harbor, deep in thought. But things are different now, he reminded himself. Meanwhile, Ars had been anxiously staring out the window, calling for Erza. She reassured him that Kakyu had teleportation magic, so the rain wouldn't be a big deal. When Kakyu finally got home, he noticed some of his stuff was missing. Erza had joked around, saying he didn't need it, so she'd gotten rid of it. But in reality, she'd stored everything safely, even fixing his glove. She figured he'd realize it right away. He was usually quick like that, but not this time. Instead, Kakyu exploded with anger, yelling at her to leave things as they were. Erza, stunned by his reaction, watched as Kakyu struggled with his frustration. He was clearly upset over how much that glove meant to him, but she couldn't believe he couldn't tell she wouldn't actually throw them away. She tried to explain, but Kakyu's emotions took over. He lashed out, mentioning some old custom from her hometown about dark elves offering damaged items to the goddess. The comment hit a sore spot, and in an instant, Erza slapped him. Completely reflexive, triggered by the insult to her heritage. Shocked by her own actions, she left without saying another word. Ars, seeing all this, ran to Kakyu, filled with worry, but he was still too shaken to process everything. In the quiet of the living room, Kakyu tried to calm himself down with the wine he'd bought earlier. He spent the whole day searching for the gloves, but couldn't find them. Did 𝚁𝚎 really throw them out? The thought gnawed at him. Overwhelmed with guilt, tears began to fall. Those gloves were the last connection he had to his beloved family. Then there was a knock at the door. 𝚁𝚎, her voice soft, asked if he'd seen Rs. A wave of dread washed over him, and his heart stopped thumping for a moment. Turns out, Rs had gone into the forest alone, in the rain. They searched deep into the forest for Rs, struggling to see through the rain, but Kakyu could still sense traces of his soul. In the middle of their search, 𝚁𝚎 apologized to Kakyu for slapping him earlier. Kakyu admitted it was his fault. He had made fun of her hometown's customs. As they both apologized to each other, they finally found Rs. The little boy was sound asleep in the nest of the baby dragon they had encountered before. It seemed Rs had come here to protect it. Seeing him peacefully sleeping with the baby dragon, they couldn't bring themselves to scold him. 𝚁𝚎 then handed Kakyu the glove. She explained she didn't throw it away and had actually fixed it. She had lied earlier because she thought it'd be funny to tease him. Ever since living with Kakyu, she'd seen his messy, sometimes awkward side, but never imagined he'd be genuinely angry. Sometimes, Kakyu could see right into her thoughts, and over time, she had come to depend on him more than she realized. Kakyu figured that was probably because he used his devil's eye too often. 𝚁𝚎 even knelt in apology for the earlier incident, leaving Kakyu confused. But they soon found themselves laughing and joking again, back to their usual selves. With a deep breath, 𝚁𝚎 said with relief that he was also a human being. Those words felt like a long-awaited answer to the unease Kakyu had been carrying. In the past, there had been people who treated him like a human, but he had always refused to acknowledge it, running from it until the chance was gone forever. But now, things were different. Even if his feelings were just an illusion, he didn't want to run anymore. Kakyu knelt in front of 𝚁𝚎, revealing a pair of beautiful rings. He held her hand, telling her that this wasn't about any contract. In the truest sense, Kakyu was proposing to her. 𝚁𝚎's heart soared as she finally realized his feelings, and with a joyful heart, she accepted. At that moment, what had started as a makeshift marriage became real. A little while later, Rs and the baby dragon were fast asleep by the fireplace. Kakyu, sitting beside 𝚁𝚎, explained that Rs was the son of his late friend. He also mentioned they ran to this remote place after dealing with bandits, but that didn't fully satisfy 𝚁𝚎's curiosity about why Kakyu was so good with magic. Kakyu stuck to his story, claiming he had lost his memory. After proposing to 𝚁𝚎, Kakyu finally opened up. Well, almost. He left out the part about being a demon from another world, and that those bandits were actually holy knights. He didn't want to upset her, but 𝚁𝚎 revealed her own secret. She had been involved in an assassination attempt on the king of Lawrence. Kakyu was a bit shocked. That was her sin. 𝚁𝚎 shared more about her past as an intelligence operative, her hometown, and how she was betrayed by the first prince. After she finished, she nervously asked if Kakyu was disappointed in her. He wasn't. He reminded her that he believed in the 𝚁𝚎 he knew. She blushed. They both felt the same, and that night felt especially warm. Time passed. By March of the year 1015 in the holy calendar, about a year and 8 months had gone by since they started raising Rs. The boy had grown a lot and could now speak fluently. He loved playing with the baby dragon, which they had named Boars. 3 big changes had come since that fateful rainy night. First, Rs had made his first friend, Boars, the baby dragon. Kakyu had named him by blending Bobo with Rs. Boars was officially part of the family now. Second, Rs could use healing magic. If his magic powers came from the dragon meat, his healing ability must be his natural talent. A rare ability that 𝚁𝚎 said was considered a divine blessing. She proudly called him a prodigy. Third, Kakyu started thinking about becoming a nobleman. 𝚁𝚎 knew it wouldn't be easy, so she asked why he wanted to go down that path. Kakyu explained that, for now, They were just small-time merchants with a shady past. To safely raise ours, they needed status. That was a reason number one. But when 𝚤𝚗 said that being a merchant was good enough, Kakyu pointed to reason number two. He wanted enough power to crush the person who framed her. 𝚤𝚗 stared blankly, trying to process what Kakyu just said. Is he serious? Taking on Lawrence? That's reckless. Kakyu then asked if she truly believed the first prince was behind her betrayal. She didn't. As an intelligence operative, she could always detect royal orders through contract magic, even if someone used transformation spells. You can't fake royal blood. Kakyu figured it must have been another royal family member posing as the prince. After all, why would the heir kill the king? It made more sense for the second prince or someone further down the line to be behind it. 𝚤𝚗 knew what was coming next. Kakyu planned to become a noble to uncover the truth. But why? He'd always said his promise was to help her atone. If that meant following the king's will, she couldn't turn a blind eye to the king's danger. This was all part of Kakyu's promise. Kakyu knelt in front of 𝚤𝚗, took her hand, and reassured her that he always kept his promises. Meanwhile, 𝚤𝚗 was off playing, swinging a stick like a sword, pretending to be the strongest hero defeating evil demons. 𝚤𝚗 was right beside him. Boys will be boys. 𝚤𝚗 was having the time of his life, jumping around, rolling in the dirt. 𝚤𝚗 played along as the villain, but 𝚤𝚗 took things too far, using lightning magic to cause a small explosion. 𝚤𝚗 shot him a warning not to stir up dust while she was drying the clothes. Kakyu glanced over at 𝚤𝚗, totally immersed in his hero game, then told 𝚤𝚗 he'd be busy preparing that. He teleported away, just as 𝚤𝚗 and 𝚤𝚗 came running towards her, excitedly asking her to read the book 𝚤𝚗 was holding. As she read, 𝚤𝚗's eyes sparkled with excitement. The hero in the story shared his name, 𝚤𝚗, the hero who saved the world, returned to his village, and married his fiancée. Hearing that, 𝚤𝚗's mind raced. Curious, he asked his mom if she ever had a wedding. 𝚤𝚗 blushed, admitting that only nobles do things like that. Realizing his mom had never been married, 𝚤𝚗 shared a look with 𝚤𝚗, then suddenly bolted off, leaving 𝚤𝚗 sitting by the fence, staring at the sky. Her thoughts wandered to Kakyu's plan to become a noble. She remembered his words. It could work, but it would take at least 5 years. The thought made her heart flutter, but she pushed it aside, not wanting to get her hopes up. Time flew by, and 𝚤𝚗 carried on with her daily routine, sweeping the yard and caring for 𝚤𝚗. Meanwhile, 𝚤𝚗 was doing his usual, playing with 𝚤𝚗, lifting large sticks, pulling wool from sheep, picking flowers in the garden, and tossing rocks around. One afternoon, 𝚤𝚗 told 𝚤𝚗 it was time to come home, but something was off. 𝚤𝚗 was trembling. As she got closer, she saw him crying his eyes out, snot running down his face. When she asked why he was crying, 𝚤𝚗 just pointed at 𝚤𝚗. 𝚤𝚗 shot 𝚤𝚗 a sharp look, wondering if he'd done something, but 𝚤𝚗 shook his head. It wasn't him. Just then, Kakyu came home, surprised to find all three of them crying together. What's going on here? Turns out, 𝚤𝚗 had secretly tried to arrange a wedding ceremony for his mom, but things didn't go as planned. 𝚤𝚗 was touched by her son's efforts, hugging him with pride, but then panicked, unsure how to explain this to Kakyu. To her surprise, Kakyu smiled shyly and said that he never said they weren't going to have a wedding. So, the rocks 𝚤𝚗 had lined up were meant to be guest seats, and the wooden arch decorated with flowers was his attempt at a wedding setup. Kakyu ruffled 𝚤𝚗's hair, proud of his son's hard work, and decided to pitch in. As a father, he couldn't help but go the extra mile. Using his magic, he rearranged the stones, grew plants, and created a stunning scene. 𝚤𝚗 and 𝚤𝚗 watched in awe as Kakyu's magic turned the area into a beautiful wedding stage, combining 𝚤𝚗's hard work with his magic. 𝚤𝚗 was thrilled, calling out to his mom, "Look, isn't it amazing?" But 𝚤𝚗 was a bit worried about Kakyu using so much magic, knowing flashy spells aren't always a good idea. But it was just for tonight, so it'd be fine. Kakyu reached for her hand and then snapped his fingers. Suddenly, magic surrounded 𝚤𝚗, transforming her clothes into a gorgeous white gown. Kakyu smirked, admitting that while 𝚤𝚗 beat him to it, He had been secretly preparing this wedding ever since the day he proposed. Ars handed his mom a flower bouquet, making Erza teared up with happiness. The wedding ceremony began, with them walking down the aisle, and Ars sitting proudly in the guest seats with Bors. They reached the stage, decorated with the heart-shaped flower arrangement Ars had made. Kakyu added the finishing touch, a burst of blue fireworks lighting up the night of blessings. The soft glow made the wedding feel both festive and intimate. Kakyu looked forward to their future together, and for the first time, Erza shyly called him by his name. Their long journey had finally paid off, marking the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. Even though only Ars and Bors were there, it didn't dim the joy of their special night. But from afar, a mysterious man watched their celebration. Who is he?